Hi, my name's Ash.
And I'm Callie.
And welcome to Paved with Gold, the eating disorder recovery podcast. I would like to acknowledge the traditional landowners on which Callie and I are recording and extend the same respect to the traditional custodians of the lands from which you are all listening.
So, we have talked about our mission for the podcast before, which is that by sharing lived experiences, one day eating disorder treatment will be as diverse as the people who live with them. And the lived experience of today's guest is just another example of how diverse our lived experience can be. She is a mental health advocate and very active on Instagram fighting stigma by sharing her own lived experience of life with mental illnesses. She is an abuse survivor, an all-round ray of sunshine. It is our absolute pleasure to introduce Izzy. Welcome to the pod.
Hello.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be on with you guys. This is very exciting.
It's an absolute joy to have you on. I've been I'm a recent follower, but a massive cheerleader already, and so I cannot wait to chat with you a little bit about your story and everything that goes along with it, because you're such a powerful voice in this space and you're so very open and honest, and I think very relatable for a lot of people. And there's definitely some things in your story that I am definitely interested in learning about and hearing about, because it's something that I think Callie and I, we haven't chatted about these sort of issues on the pod before. So let's get into it, shall we?
Let's do it.
We'll start as we always do, is if you can just tell us a little bit about your story, where things started, and how recovery was for you and where everything sort of started for you.
Of course. So I kind of had disordered eating pretty much all my life. I can't really pinpoint a time where it came in. I think it started to develop more into an eating disorder when I was about 13. And it just kind of progressively got worse. I tend to jump from one coping skill to the next. So I started with trigger warning here because I'm going to discuss suicidal ideation and self-harm. Because I kind of started with self-harm, and then I went to some substance use, and then I went to my eating disorder. It was like every single time treatment teams tried to take one away, I just moved on to the next. And my eating disorder kind of became the most socially acceptable way to be able to do that. I think particularly because when I was initially diagnosed, I was diagnosed with atypical anorexia, which, whilst this is absolutely not true, it is often seen by professionals as inferior anorexia, where it's like
trash definition.
Yeah, but it's
not fans over here.
No, it's just so a lot of the treatment that I got was just like, oh, you'll be okay, you'll be fine. Like, I was in hospital just for my general mental health, and the psychiatrist was just like, are you just doing this all for attention? And I was like, no, what? But yeah, luckily I had a psychologist then, but that was I guess the beginning of my treatment, because I was then transferred into an eating disorder unit. Which, controversial, I think, for me at that point, because I just learned a lot of behaviors, which was very problematic. But yeah, it was kind of, I guess, the beginning of my eating disorder being the primary focus of care. Whereas before then, I'd spent years where it was just suicide and self-harm that were the main focus. Yeah, so when I went into treatment from that, I was then moved to a different facility because I was unsafe. And so after that, I almost became desperate to go back to that facility because it was the best treatment that I'd received, because it was the first time I'd been in private care. And that is a very different experience to public. So it was problematic in ways, but it also gave me the first sense of maybe people are actually going to help me. And then after that, I guess, things just kind of spiraled from there. And my eating disorder became the primary problem. And I very much got to the point where majority of the reason that I was engaging in behaviors was to try and prove to people that I was sick and that I did, in fact, have anorexia, and not, as I used to think of it, fake anorexia, which once again is absolutely not the case. It was just something that was so ingrained in me. And I went to different professionals. I went to a cardiologist because I have a heart condition, and they were just like, oh, okay, it's just atypical anorexia. And all of those messages just played into my head until it was just like pretty much the main reason that I was doing it. It wasn't even about like losing weight or the compulsions about it. It was literally, I'm going to do this so that I can prove to everybody that I am sick and that I have, real anorexia. And from that point, like things just got worse. I cycled through eating disorder inpatient hospitals, which were less than helpful. I pretty much always left feeling neglected, like my needs weren't met, like I was just being treated like this generic patient, like I wasn't sick enough because I was comparing myself to all of the other girls in there. And like having atypical anorexia, you do really compare yourself. And I mean, I think that's general with all eating disorders, but particularly with, a diagnosis that is, considered atypical, even though it's not. It's just like that cycle became really easy to get stuck in. And then I eventually got to the point where my diagnosis changed and I thought that this was going to make me feel really valid and that everything was going to change. It was going to be this miraculous thing. It's like, everyone's going to take me really seriously now. And that isn't what happened. Everyone was just kind of like, you get to one thing and it's like, oh, that's not really good enough. And I don't think that there's ever a point with a lot of professionals, which are not the very good ones, that they're genuinely like, okay, like you're really sick. Like I think it's always like, oh, but we've seen worse. Oh, you're not that bad. Like we've seen worse. I've had someone who's smaller than you. And so even though I made it to like the milestone, it was like, oh, but I don't have the severity of anorexia now.
Yes. Can always want more, right?
And I think like even that cycle that you get stuck in, it's everybody perpetuates it. Like everyone's feeding into it. Like even my like treating doctors and everything, like, it's just so wild. I've had some of them say to me like, oh, you can stop eating now. Like that's too much. Like you've gained too much weight. Like what am I supposed to do with that? Like literally you finally like push to gain the weight that you're supposed to gain. And then they're like, oh, don't get too far, which just makes absolutely no sense.
So fucking irresponsible. Like makes absolutely no sense. Like it's just, we could probably just do the entire episode on that statement alone. But anyway, continue.
Honestly, it's so fucked up. So I got to that point and I had my final like experience in hospital that was like really unhelpful, where they pretty much told me that another patient deserved treatment more than me because of their weight pretty much. And I was like, that really like, whoa, I was literally crying about it the day before with my psychologist. I was like, I'm so scared that they're going to think that someone's worse and like needs more help than me. And then they literally told me it the next day. And so I discharged because I was like, I cannot stay here, even though everyone was like, you should not be discharging. And I was like, I'm not staying in a place that's going to talk to me like that. And so after that, I was like, I'm not going back to that facility. And this was after like years of cycling through it. I will stay out. I'll do what I need to stay out. And so I pretty much did that, but slowly declining, just staying enough to be able to stay out of hospital. And I did that for another year. And it's so funny. Like, it's not, but it's like,
you know what you mean.
You just think that like eventually it's going to be enough, and it never is. Like no matter what, like
absolutely not.
Even like starting from like a different diagnosis and getting to all of those milestones that I once just never thought I'd be able to get to. It's just like you keep going.
Always shifts focus, 100%.
Never ending,
100%.
And it's not just your eating disorder telling you that, oh, you have constantly got to just get to sort of the ultimate goal, and then once you get to that goal, then it's another one after that. It was reinforced by your medical team who was trying to treat
verbally.
You. It's just, I don't have any kind words to say, so I'm just going to shut up.
I was going to drop the C-bomb again.
I remember like at one point when I had atypical anorexia, I literally wrote in my notes, I think I'm going to die. If this kills me, it's because no one paid attention to me because of my weight, purely because of my weight. And I was genuinely convinced like that was it. And I was going to die because I was being neglected purely based on my weight.
Yeah, we talked about this in our episode with Dr. Ash Alami, and he was saying of the absolute life and death consequences of medical weight stigma.
Mm-hmm.
And it's absolutely
100%.
real.
It's literally life and death. It's not a joke.
It's absolutely not a joke. And
we see it every day.
And this bias that exists in the medical field has absolutely no place.
No
place, especially with eating disorders, but in general, ever. Yeah, it's just, it should not
Unfortunately,
exist.
We see it far too often. Yeah.
It's way too common. And I mean, like, that was still pretty early on in my treatment. I am very lucky that I was able to get a private psychologist, because she pretty much changed everything for me, because I finally had actual support from someone who didn't have weight bias and would take me seriously no matter what weight I was at, which was really wild. And like, also, I used to be with the public medical system, like the mental health system. Like, this is such a wild experience now. Okay, my dog's going into my lap. Sorry.
That's okay.
Welcome to the pod, Cobie.
For those who can't see, which is most people, Cobie is Izzy's service dog, which I have lots of questions, which I can't wait, because we're massive lovers of fur babies with jobs and those with no jobs.
And those with no jobs.
Gotta love a doggo with a jobbo, honestly.
We love it.
A doggo with a jobbo. Stop it. Okay, anyways, Carrie, continue.
Yeah, so like, having that psychologist really like changed a lot of my perspective, and I started seeing her twice a week after I discharged. And that really helped, but I was still very much on maintenance, and I was very, very unwell, despite being okay enough. And when I say okay enough, I mean medically okay enough, which was also questionable, but
you're sort of functioning, right?
Just functioning enough that they're not going to do anything.
Hey, you were like alive, so what else do you want?
Exactly.
How old were you at this point?
18.
Okay.
But I started treatment for my eating disorder when I was 16, and I am now 21. So I was seeing her twice a week, and functioning enough to be in the community, but I was like the most unwell I'd ever been, because I was doing everything that I had been doing, but doing it just not enough that it was going to cause me more trouble. And I just kind of continued to decline from that point. And eventually I got the point, you can absolutely cut this out, because I don't know whether it's going to be triggering or not. So up to you guys on that. But I actually became incontinent. And that was like my holy fucking shit. What have I done? Like, incontinent, I was 19 at that point. Like, literally incontinent at 19. And I was like, nah, this is too far. And like, I was having all of the physical symptoms that come with anorexia. And I also thought that this was something that would make me feel valid, but it didn't. I just had all of the shit, and I was like, this is horrible. My body was not coping anymore.
I mean, with your permission, Izzy, I'd actually think it's important to kind of leave that in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. Yeah.
Like, if you're okay with that, purely because
it's part of your story, and it sounds like it
is part of your story, but also I think, and this is one of the many myths that, I mean, anybody who is listening to this probably doesn't think this, but who's actually lived through it. But I think there's this big societal sort of myth that's been around for ages that eating disorders are glamorous or willpower or a lifestyle, which they obviously are not. Like, this just goes to show the physical breakdown of the body, of it's trying to survive, right? Your body was in pure survival mode of, muscles, we don't need those. We don't need that.
Just keep you alive. Yeah. I think also, like you said, Ash, like, perhaps people listening to this might not think this, but I think it's also important for like sufferers as well, because I think there's this narrative, and you probably both relate to this, of like, you're invincible, right? Like, but it's not going to happen to me, or, but I'm medically stable, so I'm fine. I can keep doing what I'm doing. My bloods are fine. This is fine. And it's like, because your body is working fucking hard to keep you alive. And so it's doing what it needs to do to keep you alive. And that kind of just shows purely like what it's just given up to keep other parts of your body functioning. And that is not fine. And it does happen.
I think, like, also it's like, it's fine now, but how long is that going to be?
Oh, there's a line.
Yeah.
100%.
It's fine until it's not.
I used to work in aged care. I was like, okay, I know what happens after incontinence. Like, what the fuck?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like, that was like, despite being really suicidal at the time, like, I still was like, this is not how I want to go out. Shitting myself in my sleep is not my way. Like, I'm not doing that.
No, this is not what I had planned.
And I think like even the hair falling out is so glamorized. It's like glamorized until you've got actual bald spots. And then it's like.
Absolutely. It's the reality.
Yeah,
of it,
it's
right?
like being so cold. And then it's like, oh yeah, okay, you know, cool and quirky, but it's actually not when it gets to the point where you're like so cold that you're in pain. It's just like everything is like, oh, it's okay, it's kind of cute, it's kind of quirky. It's like, oh, you're doing a really good job at losing weight. And then it is so incredibly not.
Or it's like, oh yeah, it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the next day it's not. It's like completely fucked.
100%. And that's how it happens so often for so many people of it is fine, it is fine, it is fine. You can go to the doctor every week and, you know, your obs are completely fine. And it could be just like the one day in whenever that is, there is a line. Your body cannot keep doing it forever. It cannot.
Yeah, it stops eventually. And I think we're always, pretending like that's not going to happen to us. But like even like doctors, like I ended up needing to go to the ER because they thought something was wrong. And I went there and the doctor was just like, maybe it's the medication you're on. I've been on the same medication for like 2 years.
Bro, I'm 19. I should not be fucking shitting myself. Are you joking?
Literally. And they were like, oh, let's get an ultrasound. And they sent me home. And like my best friend at the time was like, no, Izzy, like seriously, this is what happens when you're about to die.
100%. Your body is fucking shutting down.
Who's the doctor? I just want to chat.
Mate, God, there's a lot of doctors I want to have a bit of a word to.
Just gonna have a sit down. Just have a seat right over there.
Yeah, they won't listen to you. They'll just fucking probably call you mad and walk away, or call you rude. That's happened to me before many times with my clients. I got called rude by a doctor the other week, and it was quite a compliment, really.
But I don't think you're mad enough, sir.
I'm like, if you fucking think I'm rude, I'm doing something right. Anyway, but yes, no, I think that's very important to keep in for sure. Yeah. If you're okay with that, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and like for me, that was like such a big turning point. Like I remember like it was just so many symptoms at that point and all of these things that I thought that when I finally got there, I would feel good about myself. But I was in fact absolutely terrified. I remember like I was on the phone with my friend one day and I was sitting on the ground bawling my eyes out because I was like, I don't know what's happening to me. I'm losing like all control of my body and this is so scary. And, you know, you still in your head, you're like, no, like this is good. This is what I wanted. I wanted to be this sick. But like eventually you do something enough and your body doesn't want to deal with it anymore. And I was like, I remember also just being so starving. I could not think about anything other than food. And I felt so scared and out of control because I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I think you think about it a lot with the eating disorder anyway. And like for me, it just like got to the next level where I literally could not do anything without thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so simultaneously as that happened, I got approved for NDIS, which is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Is that right?
Yep, nailed it. Yep.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
And that they did not put anorexia on my diagnosis because it was a medical issue, despite being in the DSM-5.
It's literally, they will not approve you for, it's fucked anyway.
No.
We won't get started on that.
So I got approved for my PTSD, my depression, my anxiety. And that was like a really big thing because it meant that I wouldn't be stressing about paying for my psychologist. At this time, my mum had cut me off from payments. She was paying for my treatment and she decided she didn't want to pay for it anymore.
Yeah.
So I was like really stressed out with money, like particularly living off government supplements, which are not a lot.
Beautiful, yes.
Like literally so minuscule that I was like, I'm so like, you cannot afford a psychologist on that.
Oh, it's fucking ridiculous. You can't even pay your rent on it. Like it's ridiculous.
No.
Anyway.
And then I got approved for this like housing program, which meant that I got to live by myself with my assistance dog, which was like incredibly life-changing, like from being homeless, from being stuck in a house with 10 guys, to then being stuck with someone who was addicted to weed and like the house smelled like a pot house, to then being like, okay, I'm actually going to have my own space and I'm going to feel safe in my house for the first time in my life.
Amazing.
Was like, just like, oh my God. And I pretty much was just like, I'm not going to fuck this up. And I don't want to lose something because I end up having to go to the hospital and then that fucks it up. I was like, no, I'm not doing this. So I decided that I was going to try recovery. And this was the first time that it been self-directed for me. I had never done it myself. I'd always kind of been arguable whether you can be forced into recovery, but forced into treatment and forced into doing the steps.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say.
There was more of a willingness to do it this time as opposed to...
And there was like an actual desire where I was like, I actually really want a different life than this because this is horrible. This is not what I wanted from anorexia. It's not serving me anymore. It's not my best friend anymore. Like, this has just gotten out of control.
Not working for me, really.
Yeah, not at all. And I think that was like, the incontinence was a real reality check for that, because I was like,
sure. Is this what I want my life to look like?
Yeah. Where I just can't do anything. It's just like, and you don't maintain friends, you don't maintain hobbies, you just like, eventually you lose everything. And I was like, this is an opportunity for me to actually regain some stuff back. And I knew that I was finally going to have support to be able to do that was going to continue to exist, and I wasn't like at fear that I was going to lose it. So all of that falling into place kind of was just like the perfect opportunity and stepping stone for me to be like, okay, I'm actually going to try this. And so I started recovery, which was pretty horrendous, the most horrendous experience that I have had in attempting recovery. I ended up with refeeding syndrome, a pretty mild version of it. I didn't have to go to hospital for it, but yeah, I ended up with like insane edema. Like, I gained weight so fast, what everyone told me was impossible. And I was like defying all odds. And I was like, this is literally my nightmare. What is going on? And I think the thing was that I was so determined. There are so many times where I easily could have gone back and it probably would have been an easier option than continuing to keep going.
Yeah.
But I was like, I don't want to go back to that. And I never want to do this again, which was like a blessing and a curse that it was so incredibly terrible that I was like, I am never going through this again.
100%. Yeah. It's like, I cannot do this again. So I have to just fucking do this once. So like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You did say that it was going to be easier to go back to your eating disorder than to keep going in recovery. But how easy would it have been in the long run, you 100%. Know?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
I think it would have been easier for a short amount of time.
Not sustainable. Whereas recovery is sustainable.
It is. There we go. We love recovery.
We love recovery. So I started that. So I started with, what's it called?
Like All In, or like?
Yes, yeah, that. Yeah. Which is just stupid because if you're in recovery, you're pretty much all in. But
sorry, what? This is a new phrase I have not heard of before.
Oh, I think it was coined by like a social media influencer back like years and years ago, I think. So all in just basically means just like doing all of the things without kind of like, if we look at, so I guess my approach for eating disorder recovery with my clients wouldn't be like absolutely do fucking everything at once, like just completely give up your eating disorder entirely, especially for people, I guess, who do have trauma or intersectionalities, because then you're kind of just removing every single coping mechanism that they have. And what a fucking shit show, because then it's just like, well, how do I cope? And you've just thrown them fully into the deep end. Whereas if you kind of like go at a pace that is sustainable and working on things and then like replacing things with healthier coping mechanisms, you know, you can kind of at least be safe doing it. Whereas all in is just like literally giving up every single behavior and just going like, yeah, that's kind of the concept, I guess. Hey,
balls to the wall. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically. Yeah.
And I decided to do that, which, you know.
Not the safest option.
No, well, I mean, it ended up with refeeding syndrome, so that's how that went.
Yeah, and that happens too for people as well.
Yes, despite all of that, it ended up being the most helpful approach because it meant that I wasn't restricting my intake.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, like for me, I found that like inpatient, they give me a meal plan, but I'm more hungry and I can't tell them because, well, I felt like I couldn't tell them because it's like, oh, they're going to judge me for being more hungry.
Yeah.
And so doing it without a meal plan, even though it should be presented that a meal plan is the minimum, not the maximum.
Absolutely.
But a lot of the presentation is like, oh, this is your meal plan. And like, I remember in hospital, you kind of like, no. And they're like, oh, you can't have more. Like,
yeah,
it's really demonized. And so for me, like going into recovery this time, it was like, I just need to just like let myself just do whatever I need to. And I ended up, another term, extreme hunger, but you know, they're all complicated, right?
No, it's relevant though, because it does happen for so many people. Like it's such a scary, of course, like such a fucking scary thing, because it's like, oh my God, like when will this hunger ever end? And you just become so like, oh, I don't know, then so hyper focused on the impacts of it and the like how distressing it is, when we could also talk about what actually that is in your body. Like, what is your body doing here? Like, what is actually the benefit of this? Because there's actually a huge benefit to extreme hunger and there's an absolute functionality of it. But of course, you know.
Is your body biologically responding to famine?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's fucking preparing again, just in case you've given it food and like, what if she does this to me again? I need to make sure that I've got, some food on board to make sure. And you absolutely just have to honor it. Otherwise your body doesn't trust you on the other side. It's a big, big thing for people to go through.
And it is absolutely terrifying.
Absolutely.
Felt so scared and out of control. And I think also having the edema on top of that, I was like, my biggest fear is actually coming true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does end. It does actually end if you keep doing it. I think if I had stopped doing it earlier, like if I had intentionally stopped doing it and like letting myself eat whatever, I think that I would have ended up back there anyway.
Oh yeah, and your body wouldn't trust you on the other side.
No.
So you've just completely like thrown its needs out the window.
Yeah, and it's just trying to repair, really. Like my best friend ended up telling me to calculate how much food I would have missed out on. This might not be helpful for everyone, but it was actually really helpful for me because it was like, okay, I have a shitload to make up. Like we've got a hell of a lot of repairing to do. So that was like how I kind of rationalized it, and I like put it on like chalkboard in my room. And I was like, okay, you have to keep eating because you have not made it up yet. You've got a long way to go.
Almost thinking of it like food debt, almost.
Yeah,
like
literally like that.
Yeah.
And I kept going with that, and it felt like it lasted forever. It didn't. It did eventually settle down, and after it settled down, I started losing a bit of my appetite. So I went to a meal plan that I worked through with a dietitian, which was helpful just so that I had a bit of a baseline of what I was doing to make sure that I was still eating enough. And this was the period where I was told by my treating psychiatrist that I didn't need to keep going and that I could settle down essentially now.
Wow, what a helpful guy.
I know. And like, I love him, but my God, I was like, you did not just say that to me.
Oh my God. I just don't even know what goes through their fucking heads sometimes, honestly. Like,
I know.
I just don't know. Like, I just don't know at what pay bracket you get to just be an absolute bell end and say shit like that. Like,
I know. And
how much do I need to earn to be able to say just stupid shit and just pretend you've never said it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I kept doing that, and then I decided to do body exposure, which essentially was a series of steps for me where I like progressively did more exposure with my body, where I would wear shorter clothes, where I would wear clothes that I haven't worn before. I went clothes shopping and I bought myself a new wardrobe that fit. And I got clothes that I wouldn't have worn for a long time. I spent a really long time making sort of like wearing really baggy, oversized clothes. And so it was a really big deal for me to start, like, particularly after gaining weight, to start wearing clothes that, were a bit more fitting or like showed my arms. And then I also smashed my scale during that process. It was just kind of like a progressive thing where I was like, it was a big moment where, I just like progressively made more and more steps. I went through my clothes, got rid of them. I started doing exposure by going out in shorts and in crop tops and that type of thing, which helped me so much. I think we forget how much body image plays in the role of an eating disorder, particularly in recovery. Like, it's really hard to maintain recovery if you absolutely hate your body.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah, and like I think previous times, like I hadn't worked on that at all. Like I just did like absolute body avoidance constantly. So every single time I ended up going back to my eating disorder, it was like this real comfort because it was fixing something that I was really struggling with. So going through that body exposure, which I think I ended up doing for like 6 months, where I just like progressively did more things. I went to the beach for the first time in like 3 years and wore a bikini, and I like eventually got to the point where I didn't have to think about putting on a crop top. I just could put it on and I was fine.
Awesome. I think every single person should wear crop tops because they're awesome. I'm a big fan of the crop top.
I agree.
Everybody should wear a crop top. Every single body.
And we always love a bit of tummy as well.
Like they're just comfortable because then you don't have to fucking like worry about things touching you in places, and like you get to just that's all I wear around home. Like I just like as soon as I get home from work, I just like strip off and I'm like, all right.
I look at t-shirts and be like, okay,
it's
what's
so
the perfect spot to cut this?
That's so good. You get like the cute t-shirts and the cropped at the same time.
Exactly. 2024 is the year of the crop top.
Oh, I love it. It's funny though, just as on the same topic, but as a bit of a topic change, it's really funny when you said I think it's under kind of acknowledged, I don't know if this is exactly what you said, but along these lines, under like body image, the role body image plays in eating disorder recovery is kind of like under acknowledged. And it's funny when you say that because I have many, many, many opinions on body image and eating disorder treatment. And I think as you were describing that, and like you tell me if you're like, nah, that's completely way off, Callie, obviously. As you were kind of describing it, what you were kind of describing to me, I don't know if it was body image or if it was body safety. Because what you were doing as you were leaving the house, you were challenging this concept of not feeling, I guess, safe in the body that you existed in. And so you were challenging that and proving to yourself that, no, nothing bad is going to happen if I do this. I can leave the house in this and be okay, and then continuing with that. So I don't know if it's like it's fun because I agree, obviously, there's absolutely that component to it. But I think we always can dig a little bit deeper and be like, what is it actually? Because I think it needs to be digged a little bit deeper than kind of, and I'm not saying in just because it's not just, but just body image. It's like can be so much attached to the body of just so many elements of unsafety. And I think what you described to me was this beautiful definition of challenging this like concept around the safety of your body.
Yeah, no, definitely. That was a really good term. I've never thought about it like that. But yeah, it definitely is just like feeling safe in the world, in my body, and like feeling safe in my mind to be able to see myself in reflections and like, I
have a question. When you were going through all of this body exposure, were you being guided by a psychologist or like by your treatment team, or is this something that you sort of chose to do yourself?
It was all self-directed, majority of my recovery this time. I think like I've tried so many times in the past, so I have had a lot of like trial and error, I guess. And because I was so committed this time, not even committed, just determined to make sure that I actually, ended up free from an eating disorder. That I just decided to do everything pretty much by myself. Everything was like how much I was eating was like, I talked to my team and I was like, no, I need more.
Awesome.
It wasn't
Amazing.
really them telling me what to do. It was just very much like me, like, I'm guiding this and then I want your input.
I absolutely fucking love that. Like you are the expert in your own life. You're the expert in your story and your journey and your recovery, and all of the treating team that's, you know, there with you, they are literally add-ons. Like you are the one that's in charge, and that's the way it should be, and that's the way everybody should be, like, not, you know, but it's the way it should be. Should just be standard.
And you lose so much body autonomy, like in treatment, and just even having an eating disorder in general. So many people are telling you what to do with your body that I think, like, actually reclaiming that and being like, no, I'm actually in charge of this. I get to say how much I'm going to do and what I'm going to do now. So yeah, it was all self-directed, but I did have support from my psychologist, and like we would have check-ins about it. And I did a lot of exposure just going to appointments because she was a really safe person for me. So I would do a lot of my body exposure going into therapy.
That's a really good tactic, actually, for anybody who's listening who might want to take that away, because by doing the exposure on your way to an appointment, if something comes up for you, that's something that you can address right then and there. So that's a really good tip.
Yeah, I did find that really helpful.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I guess I just kind of kept going with that, and I really used Lent on my platform a lot in sharing my experience. I think that I see so much of recovery glorified when it isn't all going out and eating acai bowls. Like it really is so incredibly hard, and it is really shit for a lot of it.
Yeah,
like I was not having a good time for
it's fucked.
a significant amount of that. Yeah, but it's like all you see online is like, I'm going to do a challenge today. It's like literally everything behind that.
Yeah, we have big issues with that.
Yeah, we're actually recording an episode right after this, which will appear after your episode, Izzy. So stay tuned for next fortnight when we release this, is all about social media and eating disorders, both the role that they play, and we're talking about recovery accounts and how they can be really good and there's some not so good aspects of it, and that is absolutely one of them. It's that you've got to like remember that these people are still people and it's still social media, and it's like I very much applaud and love the honesty in certain recovery accounts, because that's what you need. And I think it does kind of take a little bit of the fear out of, like, even if it sounds like people are saying recovery is really hard, it is not fun, it is not glamorous, it is really, really challenging. At least someone being honest with you and telling you that, so that you're not surprised when you get there. Because I think a lot of the time, like, you feel like if you're at the top of this sort of roller coaster, just about to start recovery, and then you're just plunging straight down, at least if you can see it, you can be like, okay, I need to brace myself. And those are like the really good parts. But when you've got this glossy, like, oh yeah, I'm going out for a food challenge and it's really great, and then you don't hear anything about it for like the next 3 days. It's like,
do you know what I hate?
Please.
I hate it when it's like, sorry. I hate it when it's like.
My favorite way for you to start a sentence.
No, I hate it when people like, nobody talks about this. And it's like literally fucking everybody talks about this. Like literally every single person fucking talks about this, and we don't need to talk about it again. Like literally, it fucking grinds my gears. But anyway, no, I was going to say is as well, like I remember a while back now, I think when you were like towards the end of your recovery, right, I think I ended up messaging you and being like, hey, have you ever like considered that maybe you actually are recovered from your eating disorder, but it's that like, you know, you've also got trauma and all of this other stuff that you now need to address, but the eating disorder component, perhaps you are recovered. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that thought process?
Yeah, well, you were the person that I was like, holy shit, holy fuck.
Fuck you. God damn it.
I think like that was like such a holy fuck, like, wait, seriously? Moment for me, because I'd never been at that point before, despite like, I mean, at different points trying and even wanting to get better. I'd never been at the point where it was like, do you think that maybe you actually don't have an eating disorder anymore? And like I hadn't engaged in behaviors in like at that point like 7 months, and I still was like very much holding on to it because I was like, No, but like sometimes I still have thoughts like about this, but like I'm not sure that those things, like I think they're always going to be a little bit at the back of my mind.
Hi, Cobie. Yeah, it can be such a wild thing though, right? Because it's like for so long, I guess it has been your identity of like, you know, it's an eating disorder. I feel like this because of an eating disorder. I'm doing this because of an eating disorder. And to get to a point where it's like, well, actually, at what point is it actually not your eating disorder? And now it's time to do, I guess, because we look at an eating disorder as a coping mechanism. And you said right back at the very beginning, you used to switch between different coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
And an eating disorder is kind of just another one of those. So it's kind of, I think, interesting when we put everything down to like, oh, you know, oh gosh, no, but I'm still having these thoughts. And it's like, well, what if those thoughts are just like actually quite normal, or you've also got trauma and you've got all this other stuff that need to be addressed. So what if it's now time to actually like address that stuff now?
I think like it's not really this whole recovered thing. I think so many people aren't even sure if it's I guess a real thing, and everyone's got such a different experience of it. Like even with my life now, like I don't really think about food. I didn't realize that was quite normal. I thought that everyone just thought about food pretty much constantly. But now it's just like, oh, it's time to eat again. Or I'm like, oh my God, yeah, I get to go out to a restaurant tonight. I'm really excited about that. But like that's like pretty much my thoughts around food. I don't really think about it. I think about it when I'm about to eat or when I'm hungry. And other than that, it doesn't really pop into my brain. And like even with my body, like occasionally I feel a little bit self-conscious. Or I'll look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, oh, I don't really like that today. But that's kind of the extent that it gets to.
Yeah.
But that's normal.
Particularly in the society we live in, like everything's so
Absolutely.
like idolized. And I think like also being online, and I do a lot of like body acceptance. And like I'm still in a relatively thin body, I would say mid-sized body. But being in a body that isn't extremely thin or on the really thin side of things, like I've experienced a lot of fat phobia, and like I've received hundreds of really horrible comments about my body. And even with that, I had a cry about it, as you do, because I think anyone would when you're getting attacked by hundreds of people online.
Faceless trolls who have nothing better to do.
It's
literally like how sad. That was literally my thought.
I'm sure they all look like absolute supermodels. I'm sure they're all
fucking gym bros, honestly. Anyway,
and like even like this whole like on that topic of supermodels, I think it's wild that these people are so idolized because like everyone's so different with their preferences.
It's fucking ridiculous. And it's like they're the only people that wear clothes or wear makeup or wear, you know, and it's just like, it's just, and God forbid if you show a different body, like.
Yeah. And that, like, I recently had a person make an entire count.
Oh, I saw this.
Izzy is fat.
It's so weird.
Written, like, in the first post is, Izzy is fat and has lied about her eating problems for a long time. This needs to be said. And I was like, babes, are you okay?
Like, no, it doesn't.
Imagine
like
going to that point. Like, I was genuinely like, do you really think that I am offended by being called fat? Like, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm fat. Okay,
fucking
cool.
Wild.
Yeah, like that didn't really get to me.
Awesome.
Yeah, which was like wild. I was like, wow, this really just shows where I'm at, like in terms of recovery and being recovered and all of that.
Can you tell us a little bit, because I know, and feel free to not talk about this if you do not want to, but I know a component of your recovery and I guess like post-recovery, right, has been starting to address your underlying issues and, you know, your trauma, PTSD, you know, maybe start exploring your sexuality a little bit more, all of those sort of things. Do you feel comfortable in telling us a little bit about that sort of stuff?
Yeah, of course. I am pretty much an open book these days.
Fantastic. Tell us more.
Online, and it's just like, okay, you know my whole life. Oh well.
We love it.
I love that you're an open book because it just talks to how powerful lived experience is, and that's why we started this whole thing, and why, I mean, it's the reason that I got help in the first place, and there's so much power in people talking about it. So we very much appreciate how open you are about it. So, and please continue to do that, because voices like yours and platforms like yours are so amazing.
Important. But yes, I can definitely talk about that. So I'm someone who, majority of my, I guess at the moment particularly, my biggest symptom in terms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder is the like nightmares that I get, and that's still something that I get really consistently. And I used to get quite bad flashbacks and just like general panic attacks, hyperarousal, and that type of thing. So it's all stuff that really affected me. A lot of my, I guess, like getting support has been from Cobie, my assistant's dog, because he is able to offer like nocturnal support. So when I have panic attacks at night or wake up from a nightmare, he's there. Apart from he's been really rude recently, and he's been trying to leave the room. She's been very rude.
He's like, I do not have space for this right now. I have my own shit going on, Mum. Thank you very much.
I was having a little cry the other day, and he woke up because he passed out like asleep, and he woke up and he was so frazzled and panicked because he didn't realize that I was crying. He's like, oh wait, oh shit, Mum's crying, oh no. And he's like, panic jumps up and just like runs over to me. I was like, he did it again. He did it like twice. I was like, oh,
I love it. It's so fucking cute. Oh my God.
But also, yeah, like support from my psychologist. I was seeing her twice weekly for a lot of my period, like during recovery. And even more recently, I've recently gotten to the point where I'm seeing her once a week, because this is twice a week therapy is intense. It is a lot of therapy.
You got shit to do as well. It's, they don't have time for it almost.
You've got a life to live, you know?
It's awesome. It's like starts expanding, right? Like before, my life was just treatment. And now I've got things to do. I've been out like 5 times in the past week. It's wild. Yeah, so I think, like that support has been like incredibly helpful, having a psychologist who understands. I've been with her for like 3 years now. And I think probably the hardest thing that I had to do in terms of like dealing with trauma was not picking up another coping strategy and not jumping to the next one or going back to the one that I already had. This is the first time since I was maybe 12 that I haven't been using some kind of substance or like coping mechanism to try and deal with trauma and like flashbacks and things. It's just like, for me with my eating disorder, if I was numbed out enough from restricting, then I didn't have to experience any of it. If I had uncomfortable emotions, it didn't matter, because I could just go back to thinking about food and my body and all of that. So getting through recovery without going back to that and having to sit with and deal with all of the flashbacks that came back. It's like you shove things down, you keep shoving it down, and eventually it is going to pop back up. And so that was like really, really intense. And that's where I found like twice weekly therapy was really helpful, because I would come into session and I just had so much to say, because it was like, it felt like so long between appointments at that time.
Sorry, were you seeing someone who was particularly a trauma therapist and trauma informed and everything like that?
Yeah. So my psychologist is both an eating disorder specialist and trauma informed.
Amazing.
Which is an excellent combo. Yes. She's a fucking legend.
We need to duplicate these people and put them everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Literally everywhere.
Agreed. I'm just like, everybody go to that.
Yeah. Can I ask, like you said, this is the first time you've kind of not turned to those other coping mechanisms. And I don't know if you can actually answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But how did you do that? Like, what did that look like for you? Because I feel like it is so like, and I feel you, girlfriend, like when I remember like those trauma flashback, those nightmares, I still get them. It can be obviously they're super fucking distressing and like brings you straight back into like that body kind of response, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like so tantalizing to do something to make that stop, because it is it is awful. It is an entire body response.
Yeah.
What worked for you, or what sort of things do you able to do or turn to or use to help you manage and cope with that? Because that's hard.
Really hard. Really, really hard. I use a lot of DBT skills, mainly ice dive. I know, love DBT.
I'm a bit of a fan of DBT. We love-hate relationship, absolutely.
Yeah, love-hate relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use particularly ice dive, which is you get a bowl of cold water and put ice in it. And you put you can do it differently, but you can put your face in it, or you can put your hands in it and you hold your hands in there, or you'll put your face in it, as long as you can hold it and make sure that you come up to breathe. You know, that is an important step.
I feel like there's an element your body kind of takes over there at some point anyway, so we're good.
Yeah. I found that's been really helpful, particularly for me with overcoming self-harm. Yeah, even like eating disorder, like behaviors and stuff. Like, I think with doing those skills, it gave me something else to like focus on. And I think people always think that you can just do one and you're going to be absolutely fine. But like for me, I have never ever just been able to do one DBT skill or one coping skill and that be it. I usually use like 5 until it passes. And like even things with like alcohol, like I used to have an issue with alcohol, and now like with my use, like everything is a lot more, I'm much better at being like, okay, I'm not going to do this by myself. Like that was a rule that I had for myself, that I was never going to drink just alone. I would only be drinking if I was with other people or like celebrating something with other people. And then also getting rid of like blades and all of that, which, you know, sounds trivial, but I find them all the time and I'm like, where the fuck did you come from? So like getting rid of them and like actually like being like, okay, I'm gonna get someone to support me and I'm gonna get rid of all of them in my house.
Yeah, it's that awareness, right? It's why you can have that there as a thing to tempt yourself with because again, when you're in the moment, you know, and you're faced with that sort of thing, it can be like, well, I know what will work, and when it's right in front of you, it can be a lot harder to reject that coping mechanism that, let's be honest, can be super effective, and then go for the coping mechanism that maybe, you know, you've got to do a few of them to get the same result. So we bang on a lot about this. It's that recovery maintenance. It's being aware of these things and having these conversations with people, identifying them, and actually like setting up your environment to be conducive to that, right?
I know that like getting rid of these, you know, the sort of things that you would use to self-harm can probably seem like a really, you know, huge step. And for some people, like maybe you might not be able to do that right now. And sometimes having it there as a backup might feel more comforting. But it's also like taking the little steps of like, it's probably good to have other coping strategies in your sort of arsenal before you fully let go of other things, because otherwise it's almost like you're setting yourself up to fail. And then you then goes like, well, I need the thing that's going to make me feel better. And it's all about, you know, that stepping stone of, you know, finally, like you were eventually able to do that and sort of remove all of those extra coping mechanisms because you'd replaced them. So
also important to note on that is that like I didn't just get rid of them overnight. Like I didn't magically get to the place where I was like, oh, I don't need to use, you know, drinking self-harm or my eating disorder to get through. Like this has been years of like doing DBT and doing all of that. Like it'd be really nice if it just like went away really quickly.
Oh, it's just not realistic.
Tedious.
It'd be nice.
Yeah.
You think of it from a harm reductionist point of view as well, right? Like again, if we spoke a little bit about it earlier, like you remove absolutely everything and you're kind of setting somebody up to potentially, not always, but potentially kind of just fucking lose their marbles because you've taken away every other coping mechanism, and maybe they've only just started learning other coping mechanisms and they're not well practiced at those other coping mechanisms yet, and they're like, you know, have a trigger and they're deep in it and they've got nothing. And these new ones that they're learning, I can't quite remember how to do it, or it didn't quite work, or what was the other one that I needed to do. So it's like, and you know, this is obviously not saying to do any of the unhealthier ones, but it's being aware of these things, I think, and looking at things from a harm reductionist point of view. What other things can we put in place? What, you know, like it's all all needs to be considered. Absolutely.
Agreed.
Yeah. That's incredible. And I think, I don't know if I'm making this up, did your therapist do EMDR or a version of?
Yeah. So we started doing that, but we ended up, I am someone who has many small and long-term traumas. So each of my trauma has to be dealt with in a different way with different treatment. And so we started doing EMDR because one of them was really present. But we just kind of like moved on from that because other ones became more predominant.
Totally. Yeah. It's kind of combining.
You know what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of shifted.
For those playing at home, can you explain what EMDR is?
Do you want to explain?
You
it?
explain.
Do you want me to?
You
explain, So EMDR is a form of, I guess, trauma therapy. It stands for, and I'm going to probably butcher this, but let's see if I can get it. Eye movement desensitization. What the fuck does R stand for again?
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
There we go. And that kind of like explains it in a nutshell. So it's basically processing a memory, so processing a traumatic memory. And it's done in a very particular way. It's done using like eye movements and kind of like almost bringing you back to a particular scenario and helping you kind of like reprocess it so that the next time sort of, maybe perhaps that trigger pops up about a particular traumatic situation, the power of it has kind of been taken away. So it might, maybe it will trigger you a little bit, but it wouldn't have as much of an impact as it used to have. It kind of just takes away the really triggering impact of it and just desensitizes you to it a little bit more. Yeah.
I want to chat just briefly about, you mentioned that throughout your recovery you had unstable housing, and I wanted you to, if it's okay, to talk maybe through the process of accessing housing and how that actually impacted your eating disorder, because I think we've mentioned this before of you have all of these things that you're supposed to be doing in eating disorder recovery, which is bloody hard enough as it is, and then you add on the added stress of
you don't have a house or money.
I don't have a place to live. So I was wondering
how the fuck do you even do it?
Exactly. So I was wondering if you could talk.
Kind of not top priority.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that you mentioned, obviously, with the NDIS, you were then able to get your own place and how beneficial that was for you. But I was wondering if you wouldn't mind touching a little bit on what it was like before that. And
obviously this is my experience because every state and place has a different process. But for me, so I was first homeless when I was 16. I ended up in a refuge and then couch surfing for a while, and then I ended up going back home to my parents' house. And then time passed and I decided to try and move out again, and I moved into this big flat share, and I ended up there were other girls when I first moved in, so it was like pretty even ratio. But towards the end of it, I ended up with 10 other boys in the house and just me, which was very scary as someone who's, survived sexual assault and abuse and trauma. It was a very, very scary experience.
And I don't want to assume anything, but based on your story, I'm assuming that home wasn't exactly a very safe place for you.
No.
Gotcha.
No.
So it's not exactly like something. So going home is a big choice. There was a big choice for you.
Yeah, and I actually went home because it meant that I could get Cobie.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the thing. So the reason that I ended up moving back after being homeless and being in a refuge and everything was because my experience in the refuge was pretty horrendous. And so I didn't feel safe there. And then couch surfing, you can only stay at places for, a period of time.
Of course.
And so the bargaining chip was if I go home, then I would get an assistance dog.
Gotcha.
And so I did that, which no regrets, even though he's whining at me at the moment. But yeah, so that it's like, it was a really unhelpful environment for me and created a very toxic relationship. My parents separated. I'm not in contact with my dad. And so, yeah, my relationship with my mom is very complicated and it is very exacerbated when we live together. And and it made my eating disorder worse, and it made, all my mental health worse. So living out of home was definitely better. And after I had lived in that like big house share for a while, I saw like how much of an impact it makes not living there. So there was no way I was going back after that. But yeah, I ended up in a really unsafe situation, and I called the housing. I don't remember the contact number for it, but it's like the local housing district coordinator kind of person. It's like one of those crisis lines that you can get if you search up crisis accommodation. And he was really lovely, and he was like, okay, let's get you out of that situation. And he put me in emergency temporary accommodation because I have Cobie. They weren't going to put me in a refuge. So we got a little motel, and they put us in for 3 nights. And then on the Monday, you have to like go into the office, into Link Housing. And they then start like processing of what to do with you next. The guy was horrible. Did not have
I'm sensing a theme here about public services.
We went into the housing office, and the guy was just like, yeah, but you've still got accommodation. And I was like, I mean, yeah, but I don't feel safe there. And he was like, yeah, but that's just because of your history. And I was like,
exactly.
Yeah, it is because of my history.
Point. Arrive at the point.
Any woman would feel safe in a house. And like there was a literal guy who'd been in jail in that house. Like not even mentioning that. I went in, and he called somebody to talk about it because I was going to try and get in with a refuge. But pulled up the refuge and was like, oh yeah, but it's just because she's got a sexual assault history. And like I was like, as if you're using this. And I ended up being sent back to that house. I had already packed up all my belongings. So I was living in a room that was just like full of boxes. And I just had this tiny little room for me and Cobie, and I just didn't leave my room. I locked my door and I didn't leave my room pretty much. And I contacted a couple of different organizations to get me a caseworker. To help me with my housing. And I found one who was really lovely, and she started making referrals to local youth refuges, because I think it's under 25 you're still a youth.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
Yeah.
And eventually they found one, and so I went into semi-independent accommodation. I think that's what they called it.
Semi-independent living.
Yeah, I lived in one of their houses that they had, and I had a housemate, and I had a caseworker who would come and see me regularly. So that was I stayed there for 7 months, I want to say, something like that. And my caseworker was amazing. It's really hard living in a house when you've got an assistance dog with other people who are complicated, who also have mental health issues, is what I was saying. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, totally.
And a drug issue, and her boyfriend was always there, and I just generally don't feel very safe around men, as also being a queer woman as well. That's really complicated. And so I didn't feel great in that house. So we ended up going through another process. So my housing isn't actually with NDIS. It just happened at the same time. The housing is with a separate organization. So I'm on the list for permanent government housing. But that list is a very, very long list.
Very long. I can only imagine, yeah.
Because I'm on priority because I have mental illness and disabilities. They then put you on a separate priority list, which then meant that I was eligible for this program, which is through a housing company, and they are with private accommodation. So I ended up getting a apartment that is open to the local public and everything. So I ended up in a really, really nice apartment.
Nice.
Really lovely. And it was such a weird. Everyone's always
so
good.
How
did you end up this? And I'm homelessness.
Yeah.
Also, girl, you
sit down. Let me tell you a story.
You paid for it. Not that anybody who has to earn it,
exactly
but
right.
you've been through it. You deserve a fancy apartment. Okay, you deserve it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You do not need to justify this to anybody.
No. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I ended up, like, it's been great, and yeah, I'm looking at moving now. The area that I'm in isn't a very, like, queer space. It's not, like, really homophobic, but it's not, like, really accepting either. It's just, like, a very family-oriented place. So I'm currently trying to move to more of where my community is, which is
amazing.
Yeah, just, like, over the bridge from me because I'm in Sydney.
Yeah. I feel like, obviously we're not going to put location stuff in, but, like, I feel like it sounds like a huge part of you kind of understanding yourself was also, like, figuring out who Izzy was, right? Like, you know, what your identity is. What is that? What does that look like? I need to go out and experiment and find that out. And I mean, you tell us, but, like, do you feel like you've been able to do that now?
A lot more. Like, I'm still definitely working it all out as I go, but it's been a really, really incredible experience over the past couple of months, where I'm, like, been really a lot more immersed in the queer culture and just, like, group in Australia and, well, not Australia, in Sydney. And yeah, it's been very, I think, eye-opening. I have been in a lot of, like, fat accepting spaces, and I just kind of didn't really know any of them existed. And it's just, like, really wild being so accepted because where I live, like, I've always lived on this side of the bridge, and so I've never really experienced what it's like in the queer central. And, like, now being, like, really immersed. Yeah, being really immersed in the, like, queer culture has been, very awesome. And, just, like, getting to figure out who I am without mental illness, because that's been my, like, identity since I was 13. So it's, like, really, really crazy.
Did you ever think you could do that?
No. And there's no way that I would be able to do that if I kept going with my eating disorder. Like, so much of my life now, like, I'm studying to become a mental health peer support worker. No way I could do that. I had to leave so many times from studying because I used to do nursing, and I had to leave because of mental health and eating disorder. And like, just everything that I do, it's wild. Like, I'm going out all the time now. There's no way you would have caught me out of the house, even, like, a year ago, maybe even 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And my life has just opened up so much in ways that I didn't even think was actually possible for me. And that is what recovery does.
Yay!
As I'm saying, you're going in for a home landing here.
Yeah. My spiel.
I just want to ask one final question, which kind of sort of is a perfect sort of summing up of that. And you did touch on a little bit, but about your platform and the role that it plays in your life now, but also throughout your recovery. Because obviously it was a recovery account, and now it's more about educating people and breaking down the stigma of mental illness and those kind of things. And you can absolutely follow Izzy on Instagram at Izzy Blooms, Izzy spelled IZEE. So go do that. Link in the show notes. But
do it now,
right now.
Plug you in.
Like, you should be typing into your internet.
Yeah, like, if you haven't
now,
right now we're acting as if we're, like, the biggest podcast in the world. You're going to get, like, this massive influx.
One day. Just one day. But no, so you have this amazing platform, and what kind of role does that play in your life now, and what do you hope to achieve by sharing your lived experience? Even though I think we kind of already know, but I would love to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, so my account has changed a lot, like, progressively as my life has evolved. I think it's really, what I've really liked that I've done is that I haven't put myself in a box. Like, when I started, it was eating recovery, but it was also mental health recovery, and it was also body acceptance, and it was also like, self-harm acceptance, and not self-harm acceptance. What's the fucking word?
Awareness.
Self-harm scar. Awareness. Thank you.
Awareness. There we go. Yes. Nailed it.
But also exactly what you said, like, you know, self-harm sometimes leaves visible marks on yourself, and it's
so it is acceptance.
It is acceptance, absolutely, of, like, the history that it leaves on your body.
Yeah. We can normalize that.
Absolutely.
That's something that we can, like, this is something that people do.
Yes. Normalize it. It's like, normalize how, like, people having those scars on show and not hiding them either.
Not normalizing something that is fucking like spoken about. Anyway, we won't go back into that. Go.
So I really liked that I've been able to do that and like evolve my account as I've like grown as a person. I do sometimes find it hard. Like, it's really easy to get boggled down in the numbers. It is, and I'm sure both of you know that. It's really, really hard not to let that get to you and get to your self-confidence. I think over the past couple of weeks, even like really just like reflected on, I guess, like what I want from my account. Now moving forward, now I'm recovered from anorexia and now I'm doing a lot better with my mental health. And also just like with the number side of things, like being famous is like my worst nightmare. Like I literally couldn't think of anything worse. Like, and yet I'm still like, sometimes I'm still like, oh, I wish I had more followers. Oh, they're gaining more followers than me. So I've really had to like bit of a reality check of like, actually, I don't want that. I think my biggest thing is just creating a little safe community. And I mean, I say little, but like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like a community where people can go and see that it gets better. Particularly like with complex trauma, it's so often it's focused purely on eating disorders and not everything that comes with eating disorders or like why eating disorders developed. So I think actually being able to see someone who's experienced abuse and experienced other traumas be able to actually recover and while still living with mental illness, be able to actually live a life.
100%.
So I think that's kind of my main thing at the moment that I'm trying to show. I think particularly with me going to queer events and trying to build a community and make new friends and all of that, I think, that's something that I'm sharing a lot about because, you know, it's a massive thing. And also a lot of people don't think that they're ever going to find that or ever going to get to the place where they are going to be able to do that, particularly with trauma. I think that answers your question.
It absolutely does.
I was just going to ask, as you were like saying about that, I had a follow-on question from it really quick. What, like, I guess as you're explaining what you were hoping for other people, I was just wondering, like, going back to like the very beginning when you did start the account for yourself and like you're keeping it running, what is it doing for you?
That's a good question. Why
did you start it? Why, you know what I mean?
Joy,
like what?
The amount of joy that I get from hearing that I'm making a difference to even one person's life is like knowing that I can have that impact is, words cannot describe that. Like I get messages like that quite frequently. And every single time I'm like, I'm going to cry. This just made my day. Like, it's just like being able to do that. And
such a privilege.
It's when I was really unwell, I'm very suicidal. The reason that I actually stayed alive was so that I could do this one day, so that I could share my story. That was like my actual reason when I didn't have Cobie, when I didn't have any other thing that was kind of helping me hold on. I held on for the hope that I'd be able to share my story. So being able to kind of like live that out.
You wanted to leave a legacy, right?
Yeah. And like being able to live that out is like a very surreal experience. Yeah, so I think, that's my main thing. And I think also it's a really big building block for me going into peer support and the mental health sector. Being able to work off that is also a massive thing and really helpful, and go into more advocacy spaces where I go to schools and that type of thing, because that's also a goal for me. It really opens up a big world for me there as well.
Well, we are behind you 100% of the way, and I think that's exactly like that. I think the world needs so many more people doing your kind of stuff, and I hope that you just like lead the bloody charge, because, like we said, you're a ray of bloody sunshine.
Thanks, guys.
And I just wanted to also, I think, when you go onto Izzy's account and follow her.
Why haven't you done that already?
The one thing that filled me with such joy was your last post, I think, of 2023, where
I love this one. Yeah.
That 2023 was the first year that you were happy to be alive and that you were looking forward to
So
living. I mean, that to me is, there are probably people who might be listening to this thinking that will never be me, but it absolutely can be you, because you're all evidence to prove that it can happen, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Bring on 2024. Like, who would have thought you'd ever be saying that, right? Yeah. Amazing.
No one.
Amazing.
Well, this has been so inspiring. I've got goosebumps everywhere. It's just been such a joy to hear you share your story, and I feel, we feel very, very privileged that you felt comfortable talking to us and sharing what you have.
So much.
We always go on about it, like, constantly. It's the reason why this podcast exists. The power of lived experience changes lives, and so keep sharing your lived experience, because it absolutely is changing people. And I think eventually we might change the system too. Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah. We're all working on it. So
we're trying.
Yeah, we're trying. But no, we just wanted to say a massive thank you for your time and for your honesty and for your laugh and for your smiles and everything else in between. And for
Cobie's input.
Thank you so much for having me, and for Cobie's input. He's cranky again.
Of course.
Not happy with me.
That's all for today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and leave us a 5-star review if you like what you hear. You can follow us on Instagram at pavedwithgoldpod. Send us an email at pavedwithgoldpod@gmail.com, or you can visit our website, pavedwithgoldpodcast.com. All of those links will be in the show notes, along with extra resources, and where you can find Izzy, all of her links will be there too. So until next time, stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast is general in nature and has not taken your personal circumstances or medical history into account. We are here to share our own experiences and the things that we have found helpful throughout our own personal recovery journeys. Please remember that each person's journey and circumstances are different, and not all of the information contained in this podcast may be relatable to you. It's important you consult your own GP or recovery team to seek out tailored advice before making any important decisions relating to your own health and recovery process. If you have found any of the content in this episode distressing, please contact your care team or a medical professional. If you or someone you know is in crisis and needs help now, please contact emergency services in your region immediately.